Okay, welcome to Yin. So a blanket and two blocks if you have them, but again, you don't need anything. So if you don't have that, don't worry about it. It's just an option. And today, if you are using a yoga mat, you want to sit to the side of it. And I am going to sit on a blanket for this because I'm more comfortable that way. So my blanket's folded about this width. It's not, there's a little bit of height to it, but not a whole lot. And if you are using a yoga blanket, you want to be on this folded edge, not on the fringed side. You could also use a bolster depending on the height, maybe even a block. So the reason why we prop up the hips is to take rounding out of the lower back. I know my lower back rounds when I sit this way, so I prefer to have a blanket or something underneath me. So you could be on the ground. That's totally fine too. Widen the feet, and you want the knees to be wider than hip width distance. And you can just bring the hands back behind you so that you lean back reclined. And this is a really nice way to start to get into the body. So you'll start to bring the knees side to side, keeping the feet wide, windshield wipers, but don't feel like you need to go all the way down toward the ground. Just start to gently get into the hips, wake them up as you go side to side. And what's nice about going slow is it starts to calm the mind, just this little bit of movement. So think about the pace your mind's at, and you want to start to take it down a little bit. And it's not going to be instant, it's going to take some time and some movement, a pose or two, maybe longer. And that's okay. All right. So you'll come back to center, soles of the feet on the mat, sitting up on whatever's underneath you. And you can bring the hands back behind you, just maybe up on fingertips. So you get that straight, tall, long spine. Feet are still wide, knees are wide, toes are pointing out, and the soles of my feet are on the mat. So you can stay right here. This is a hip opening. If you feel like you have a lot more space in this pose, you could bring the hands in front of you, or maybe you try it and see what happens. If everything collapses, then maybe skip that and just come back here and stay with the hip opening. If you're here and this is feeling good, here's where you could use blocks if you want to. This is a nice way if you feel like you put the hands forward and they can't quite touch the mat, or if you can come forward enough and it's easy, you're not anywhere near your edge, maybe you rest the forearms on the blocks at whatever height. So Yin, we're keeping it easy. Find a place where you can be in this modified wide-legged straddle. You can close the eyes and then you can start to let the spine go. It can round, the head can come down, the eyes can close. And this is our first pose. So take an observer point of view of the mind. Take a peek in there. What's happening? What thoughts maybe are on loop that you can observe without judgment? And that's really all meditation is shifting the perspective of what's happening in your head. So instead of letting your thoughts just swirl around and following that, taking a step back, looking in, and just being a witness. I heard this once and it stayed with me because it's so true and clever. The only head you get to see inside of, or the only mind you get to see inside of, is your own. Whenever you're wondering about what someone else is thinking, take a look at yourself. What are you thinking? And is that really what you want to be thinking? Our thoughts are powerful and they create our future. As you breathe into the pose, slowing the breath down, being more mindful of how long the inhales and the exhales are. And getting lost in the sensation of the breath. Feeling how the body is accepting the shape that you're in. Maybe it's pulled you in a little further, but no effort. Don't try to go deeper. We'll start to make our way back up. If you have blocks in front of you, just set them off to the side. Bring the hands back behind you, and we'll come back to windshield wipers. So as you lean back, just move the knees side to side. Using this as a counter pose for that first pose. And we'll come back to seated, but this time we'll extend the legs out. So don't bring the legs as wide as you possibly can. Walk them in a little bit so you're not as wide as they'll go. You want to keep it easy. So bring it in maybe 20%. And then start to point the chest toward the right foot, sitting up tall. And you'll just start to fold over the right leg, but try not to go too far in, especially with this one. So you want to go part of the way, keep it easy and gentle. Your body will pull you in deeper when it's time. Just try to stay in the shape. Keep focused on your breath. And stay in that observer perspective of the mind. So as soon as the mind starts taking off away from you and you feel like you're chasing it, come back to just like you're window shopping, standing outside of a window of a store and looking in. I was in a bad mood yesterday. I couldn't figure out why. I went to the gym and worked out, and that usually does the trick, but it didn't. And then I ended up going to play tennis, and I'm a beginner. So I have to use every thought I possibly can to try to make tennis happen for me. And I did that for about an hour, and then I felt great. And I realized the reason I felt great was because I just took a break. I got to think about something exclusively, just that one thing, move my body. And then when I came back to my regular life, I felt so much better. And yoga is another activity that can bring a lot of inner peace for us in the same way. We get better at letting things go that are taking up too much space in our heads and our hearts, so we can make room for new things that we want to welcome. Let's walk ourselves back up. You'll leave the legs right where they are. Just take your time bringing the chest up, still pointing toward the right foot. And then we'll slowly start to point towards center, feeling the difference in one side of the torso compared to the other. Then slowly start to transition over to the other side. So chest is pointing more toward the left foot. And you'll start to walk the hands forward. You could use blocks here too if you have them. I didn't mention that on the first side, but a lot of different ways that you can use them. Hands on the blocks, forearms on the blocks. They can be armrests. And you can skip them all together, especially if the hands easily reach the ground. Then you don't really need the blocks unless you feel like bringing the forearms down is more relaxing. And you're either closing the eyes if that's comfortable for you, or just find one spot you can focus on without keeping the eyes wide open. So the eyelids are heavy. Half open or half closed. So what your sleepy face looks like. And we'll bring ourselves back up, head eventually over the hips. Start to point the chest forward, keeping the legs where they are. You can just keep the eyes closed or just looking down, taking a moment to feel the spine, the back sides of the legs, how that all feels after going side to side. So when we started out, we had the legs bent with the soles of the feet on the mat, similar shape. That was a modified version of this next pose. So this next pose will keep the legs straight, although if it's not working for you, you can always come back to soles of the feet on the mat and the legs wide. But if the legs feel open enough, you could start to walk the hands forward and go straight forward, but stay away from your edge. Try to just go to a gentle place, someplace that feels easy in your body. Breathe into it. So these wide-legged straddles are great hip openers. They also start to open up all the muscles in the legs. And folding forward for some of us is really relaxing. Other people enjoy back bends more, which is the opposite direction. So if you're a backbender and you struggle in forward folds, just don't go as deep. And if you do enjoy forward folds, you might need to pull yourself out a little bit if you've gone too deep. Now that you're here, focused on your breath, trying to come back to that observer mindset over and over again. It's a practice. Maybe feeling the scalp start to release, soften, skin on the forehead. Sometimes we think so hard that the skin starts to get taut. We furrow our brows, maybe clench our jaw. Trying to let that go or being happy if it's already happening. Okay. Start to bring yourself back up to seated, taking your time. You don't want to rush through the transitions. If you're using blocks, those go off to the sides. And then you'll grab on to the backs of the thighs to gently bring the feet in. You don't want to use just the legs to do that. Bring the hands back behind you, back to those windshield wipers. So knees will just go side to side. And the hips are more open than they were when we first started. So maybe the knees do start to get a little closer, but try not to push it. Just find a place that feels good. We're in that wide-legged straddle for quite a bit, so it's nice to get some movement. And you'll come back to seated. This time, let's bring the soles of the feet together and the knees wide. And if you have any knee trauma, it's always a good idea to support the knees. So using blocks or getting some eventually would be advised. Otherwise, if the knees feel fine, they don't have to be touching the mat, but they are working down toward the mat. Just let them, you want to open up the inner thighs here too. So grabbing onto the ankles, start to lift the chest and then just fold forward part of the way. You can let the spine round. Slowly starting to work your way into this shape. It's almost like you're getting into the pool, but you're walking in. So you take a couple steps in, you get a little deeper, and eventually making your way to going all the way in. Or maybe you just go most of the way in. These poses are similar. We just take our time. You don't have to rush. And if you feel like you're in this shape and struggling, you can move the feet farther away from you. That'll make it more gentle. Another option is to not let the chest go forward. So you can do it just sitting upright if it's too much on the hips or inner thighs. And we'll make our way back up nice and slow. Once the head's over the hips, use the hands to bring the knees back together. And then we'll come to hands and knees. If you're using props, just have them to the sides of the mat so they're available. And we'll come to kneeling if that works in your body. So you can either have the tops of the feet down and sit back onto the heels. You could do a toe tuck if you want to do a stretch on the feet. You would need to have your shoes off and sit back onto the heels. And that can be kind of intense for some of us. So skip it if it's too much today. And if kneeling isn't working, then just come to seated on the ground. That's fine too. You'll take the hands, interlace the fingers. So all the way down. And then we'll get into the wrists a little bit. Move the hands around. So trying to open up those wrists. When you keep the fingers interlaced, you really can't go that far. So just explore that range of motion. You're probably going in the same direction, making a little groove there. That's fine. Keep going in that direction. We'll switch at some point. Maybe you're not. Just keep doing that if you're not. All right. Now try to go the other way, which can be more challenging because we just want to do things the same way over and over again. And see if you can get that same range of motion or work toward it. Okay, hands come back down to the mat. If you have the toes tucked, untuck them, separate the knees to hip width distance. You can tap the tops of the feet, especially if you're in the toe tuck. And if you're seated, come to hands and knees. So we're all on all fours for this one. So still staying in the wrists, we'll start to change the direction of the hands. So you can take the right hand, bring the back of the hand down onto the ground so that the fingertips point toward the left. Yeah. And then maybe the left hand does the same thing. So the fingertips point toward one another. If you're uncomfortable with this, you can just do one hand at a time. See how this feels. If you bring the chest and the hips back, it's less weight on the wrists. If you bring them forward and try to stack the shoulders over the wrists, it's definitely a little bit more intense. So figure out where your wrists feel good. It's not a long hold, but it is one you need to breathe into. And it can feel awkward because we don't move the hands and the wrists this way, but it's a nice way to open them. Okay, one hand at a time, bring the palms of the hands back down to the ground. And then from here, let's turn the hands all the way. So you can turn the hands out. So opposite of what we did, fingertips toward the sides. See how that feels? Some of you might be comfortable turning the hands all the way around so that the fingertips point toward the knees. And if that's the case, keep the shoulders stacked over the wrists. And then from here, and if it's just one, you could do one hand at a time. So one hand back and one hand regular, just forward. That's another way to keep it a little bit more gentle. But if you're okay with both hands, try that. And then from here, we're taking cat-cow. So on the inhale, reach the heart forward, lift the tail. On the exhale, round the whole spine, chin in toward the chest. Then keep going at your own pace. You don't need to stay with anyone. Maybe you add more movement. And when we talk about adding more movement, it could be circles. So you're rotating the shoulders over the wrists in circles, hips are going with you. And if you do that, then go the other direction. You could also just stay in cat or cow and breathe there and not do any movement if that's feeling better. And then coming back to center wherever you are, turn the hands back around so the fingertips point forward. And then bring the big toes together, sit the hips back, coming into child's pose. Walk the hands forward, just here for about a minute before we start coming into some back bends. So this is a gentle back bend. Chest is reaching forward, hands are reaching forward. Hips are pulling back. If the knees are okay with it, you can lift the hips up as high as you need to quiet down the knees. Trying to get the forehead to touch the ground. That way the relaxation response kicks in. You enjoy being in this nice, safe space. And you'll come back forward onto the forearms. So shoulders stacked over the elbows, hands are shoulder width distance apart. Step the feet back behind you and just set the hips down onto the mat, tops of the feet to the mat. And you're coming into an easy Sphinx pose. So as you press the tops of the feet down, hug the belly in a little bit and reach the heart forward. But then notice where the gaze went. You want to bring it down the bridge of the nose so you feel that space in the backside of the neck. So Sphinx pose can be an intense back bend for some of us. If you feel like you need a break at any time, your break is just bringing the hands one on top of the other and resting the forehead down on the hands. Still a back bend, much more gentle. And then whenever you feel like you want to come back to Sphinx pose, you come back and join. This is one of those poses in yin for those of us that struggle with back bends, can take some time to build up to a longer hold. So don't suffer through it. If at any point you feel like you're white knuckling it, definitely take a break. That's too much effort. What helps me stay motivated in back bends is knowing that it takes away the rounding out of the upper back. And I am definitely one of those people that finds comfort in rounding my upper back when I'm sitting, when I'm standing, even though I try not to. So this is a great way to kind of train the spine to go the other way, evening things out. And in a full body yoga class, we get the spine moving in all directions, which may not happen in our regular lives. Last few breaths here. Make them as long as you can, in and out through the nose, feeling the breath go up and down the back of the throat. And start to come down to that resting position. So making a pillow with the hands, stacking one hand on top of the other, and then resting the forehead down. So now you let everything release. You're here for about a minute. Ankles roll out, toes will start to point toward one another. And we'll lift the head up, bring the hands to the mat, and come back to tabletop, all fours, hands and knees. Once you do that, we'll be on the knees for a little bit. So if you want some padding, grab a blanket to put underneath the knees, or you can always double up the mat and fold that in, and then that's extra padding too. So either one works. Make sure you're comfortable. Then from here, keeping the hips right over the knees. They're going to want to go forward with you. Bring the forearms down to the mat. Hips still over the knees. And then notice if you're trying to dip the belly down to the mat, hug the belly in, and you should feel like the lower back gets long. So you want to hang on to that. So now you can walk the elbows forward, and you're going to start to feel a pull in the upper body. And that's your stretch for melting heart pose. The forehead can come down to the mat. And be careful with how far out you put the elbows. So if you're feeling like you're going too deep in, then you walk the elbows back. They don't need to go out all that far. You want to feel like you're getting a decent opening in the upper body. It's not your first back bend. We already did Sphinx pose. So you're probably a little bit more open than if we did this pose first. And if for whatever reason this pose isn't working for you, you can come back to Sphinx pose. That's still a back bend and a very similar shape. So hips over the knees if you're in melting heart pose, hugging the belly in to get that length, long lower back, feeling the length of the spine, forehead touching down just like child's pose. Elbows ahead of the shoulders, if that's feeling okay. And whenever we're in a shape that's similar to tabletop, all fours, the toes can either be tucked underneath you or the tops of the feet can rest down. So whichever one's more comfortable. Okay. Come back up onto the hands, making your way back to tabletop. So I gave you those options with the feet. Occasionally I'll get a cramp in a foot, so then I'll automatically tuck the toes. So wanted to make sure you knew that you had those options. Bring the big toes together, sit the hips back, come back to child's pose with the arms out in front of you. But this time looking forward at the hand, so the head's lifted. Take this right arm and you'll thread it through underneath the left arm, bringing the right side of the head down onto the ground. So child's pose is still the same in the lower body, but the upper body has a twist, and we're also getting into the shoulders. So that left arm stretching way forward toward the top of the mat, right arm's reaching away from you. Belly's soft between the thighs, but the outer torso, sides of the rib cage, they're resting on the thighs. Back to child's pose, right arm forward, and you'll switch sides. Left arm threads underneath the right arm. Bring the left side of the head down onto the ground so you can rest it. Stretch the arms away from one another and then see where you can relax and ease your way into the pose. And you'll lift the head, left arm comes forward again, back to child's pose with the arms out in front of you, forehead down, traditional shape. Try not to reach forward with the shoulders. So if you feel like the shoulders are going toward the hands, bring them more toward the hips. So you get a little more space and freedom in the upper body, especially around the neck. And if it helps, you could move the head side to side, giving yourself a little bit of massage on the forehead. And then finding that one flat spot on the forehead that rests down just right, coming into stillness for the rest of this child's pose. Not much longer. Start to lift the head and come onto hands and knees. So you can bring the feet to one side and you'll just come to an easy cross-legged seat. We'll do one more wrist opening. So easy cross-legged seat, doesn't matter which shin's in front. Interlace the fingers, turn the palms to face away from you. So you're stretching the arms. And then from here, you'll stretch the arms up and overhead. So shoulders away from the ears, don't let those come up. And the wrist opening happens when we bring the thumbs up and the pinkies back. So you should start to feel that stretch there. That's what we're focused on. Sides of the torso get long, but don't feel like you have to create a whole lot of space there. Really focus on the wrists more than anything else, but arms do have to be straight. So elbows hug in. Pinkies keep reaching back, thumbs up. And keep the fingers interlaced. Just bring the hands down in front of you. And like what we did before with the fingers interlaced, palms together, notice which index fingers in front. So just take note of that, because now we're going to separate the hands, bring the hands back behind us, separate the feet wide, and then switch the crossing of the legs. So other shin in front. So this way we're even. Let's just take a side stretch, give our arms a break before we do the other side. So right arm reaches up and over, left hand can come out to the side. Here's where you can get as much space and length as you can on the right side of the body. Both hips are down, so try not to lift the right hip. And we'll take it over to the other side. Right hand comes out to the side. That right elbow could be bent, or you could have the arms straight. You choose. Left hip is planted, so you can reach away from it. Come back through to center, interlace the fingers one finger over. So now the other index finger goes in front. You can look at it. It's also the way you don't want to go first. Turn the palms to face away from you. Reach the arms overhead, shoulders away from the ears. So you keep space in the neck. Pinkies back, thumbs up. So you're working with that constant rotation of the hands to get into the wrists. Almost like you're pushing something away from you, like you're trying to push it back behind you with the palms of the hands. All right, bring the hands back down, arms back down. Separate the feet, come down onto your back. Soles of the feet still stay on the mat. So you're keeping the legs bent, and then scoot the hips over to the left. Bring the knees to the right. Wait, did I say that right? Yeah. Scoot the hips over to the left. Bring the knees over to the right. And you're coming into a spinal twist. So left arm reaches outside the shoulder. Maybe the gaze goes in that direction, but it doesn't have to. Just close the eyes or keep the eyes softly open. Feeling your way into it, keeping it gentle and easy. And this is our deepest twist of the practice today. So enjoy that. If you have any tenderness in the lower back area, sticking something between the knees, like a block, a blanket, a pillow, creates more space in the lower back. So that's always a good idea. You have something nearby. You'll start to roll the head back to center. Bring the feet back onto the mat, finding center on your back. And then scoot the hips over to the right. Knees come over to the left. You slowly make your way into a twist on the other side. Right arm reaches outside the shoulder. Maybe the gaze goes over the right arm or somewhere in that direction. You start to settle in. Make sure you leave lots of space in the pose so you can go deeper as you become more comfortable in it. Start to bring the head back to center. Bring the feet back to center. Get your back settled onto the mat. And then you'll bring the knees in toward the chest. Hang on to the knees. So one hand on each knee, keeping the knees and the feet together. We'll just start to take some circles. So keep those thighs together. Move the knees around in a circle. Feeling the hips move around on the mat. Lower half of the spine. It's a nice way to counterpose longer twists, meaning longer holds. Then switch directions of that circle if you haven't already. Going the other way. One more circle. Then bringing the knees back in toward the chest, open up the knees wide, happy baby. Grab onto the backs of the thighs, calves, ankles, inner or outer edges of the feet. Keep the hips down on the mat. head on the mat, chest is open. And then you pull back with the hands with whatever you're hanging on to get that hip opening. Knees are wide, so they're wider than the torso, and that's how the hip opening begins to happen. Then bring the knees back in toward the chest. Set the feet down onto the mat. Come into Shavasana, final relaxation pose. If you want to use props, you can bring something underneath the head for a pillow, or you can bring something underneath the knees to lift the knees, elevating the thighs. That sometimes feels really nice. Or if you just don't need anything, then keep it simple. Lying on your back, eyes closed, backs of the hands resting down on the ground, out a little wider than shoulder width distance, feet a little wider than hip width, turning the toes out. This whole practice leading to the ultimate stillness. One of our most important poses, where everything comes together. You'll start to wiggle the fingers and the toes. Reach the arms overhead. Maybe you interlace the fingers and turn the palms to face away from you, feeling that opening in the wrist. And switch the weaving of the fingers, do the other side. Start to walk the feet in, bending the legs, rolling over onto your right side, cradling the head and the arm. Unless you're on a pillow, you can just keep the head on the pillow. You'll start to use the left hand, press it down so you can lift yourself up to your easy cross-legged seat. Sitting up tall, closing the eyes if you're comfortable. And taking a moment to note how different you feel now after your practice compared to when you started. This is why we do yoga. Bring the hands together in front of you. Maintain the lift of the chest. Start to bow the head, taking a moment to honor and acknowledge your heart and spirit, as well as everyone around you in your world. Bring the head back up. Blink open the eyes. Namaste. The light in me greets and honors the light in you. Thank you so much for joining in today. This is one of my favorite classes that I'm teaching right now, so I really appreciate your participation, however you can do it. See you next time.